Now, a very warm welcome to this session on aid for trade at times of war, the case of Ukraine. A very warm welcome on behalf of the European Commission. My name is Olaf Bruns. I'm a European Affairs journalist based here in Brussels, and it is my honor and really a pleasure to lead you through this hour and a half. Now, Russia's brutal and unprovoked war of aggression against Ukraine has led to an amount of human suffering that leaves literally speechless. The pictures of destruction in Ukrainian cities and towns are pervasive. Millions of people have been displaced, and of course, thousands have been killed and many more injured. But the war has also led to major disruptions of business and trade flows. Infrastructures have been destroyed, and traditional trade routes through the ports on the Azov and the Black Sea are or have been blocked by Russia. In normal times, Ukraine is a major producer of wheat, but these days we are seeing how difficult it is to even implement a deal on grain exports that has been signed by all parties a few days ago. As a result, prices are rising worldwide, and worse, in many countries of the global south, there is hunger. Now, the questions here are, how can the international community facilitate business continuity, including for the smallest enterprises? Which aid for trade initiatives dating from before the war are still relevant today? How has aid been and will continue to be repurposed? And how aid for trade can play a key role to support recovery and reconstruction in Ukraine? To dive a little deeper into these questions, we have 2 keynote speeches and 4 further presentations by speakers from various institutions and organizations. And we have some time to debate what will have been said, including with a few questions from you, from the audience. Now, a few housekeeping rules and details, actually no more than 3. My job is also to keep an eye on the timing. And as we have a very, very, very tight schedule, I might occasionally interrupt the speakers. Please don't take it personally. It's really meant to make room for all participants. Second, you need to know that the session is recorded, which also means you can rewatch the entire session on replay. And third, we will take questions at the end, time allowing. And to get ahead of things, there is a specific Q&A box in Zoom at the bottom of the screen where you can write your questions during the entire session already, and from where we will take it then towards the end. So without further ado, let me introduce Taras Kachka, the Deputy Minister of the Economy of Ukraine, who will shed light on burning questions like, what are the biggest challenges Ukraine is facing as a trading nation? What are really Ukraine's current and future needs in this area? How could WTO members provide both the immediate and the longer term support that is needed? Mr. Kachka, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Olaf, for the introduction, and thanks for organizing this event. Indeed, this is a very unique moment in the history of Ukraine because we have 5 months of a very aggressive 8-year war against Ukraine caused by Russia. So that we went through major trade and economic shocks starting from 2014. And then when Russia occupied Crimea and partially several regions in east, so in Donbass. But for last 5 months, we are living in the circumstances of total war against Ukraine. So the attack has started in, let's say, 3 dimensions, so from north, east, and south, from sea, from the territory of Belarus, and this is really a massive war, so that comparable with the intensity comparable to Second World War or First World War, and I think that we, after 5 months of war, we can say that we managed to survive. We managed to show our resilience, with which is possible, which became possible only with support of our friends, of our neighbors, of our allies. This maybe very strong word, but it's really to reflect the way how we feel this support from EU member states, from all European nations, Western nations, from the UK, the United States, Australia, Japan, New Zealand, and many other states throughout through the globe. And indeed, we have also lessons to be shared and about how trade is possible and how trade is important for in these times. So. First of all, I think that we need to understand that Ukraine is went through transformation, so that for last 30 years from state with planned economy into state with open market economy, so that we are really open. We import a lot, export a lot, and half of our GDP depends on export. And we are really big exporter for mostly known for commodities like grain and but as well in steel sector and some other sectors. And sometimes surprisingly, even for us as for government, we discovered immediately before the war that war and blockade of trade influences also supply of semiconductors of chips, because we were one of biggest producers of inertial gases like neon, which are used for microchips, which are used in car industry as well. So that's why, so that this open economy and economy which relies on trade is both vulnerable and more vulnerable and more resilient. And so let me start from resilience. I think that what is important now, so after 5 months of this war, is that we have all elements of our economy operating, and so we have normally operating electricity grids, communication, the financial services. 80% of banking units are operating quite well. Postal services, all governmental services which are involved in supplying of goods and production of goods. Our railway are operating. And what is important is that private initiative ensure the fast adjustment of our trade flows, so that after the start of the war, that we have only western border which is available for physical trade, for logistics. This is a border with EU member states, with Poland, Slovakia, Hungary, Romania, and we see how companies, private companies, and mainly traders, quite fast reoriented their work on this market. So that's why, due to this transformation of economy, we are really resilient from these attacks. And even me personally, I was more than aware that we will not be able to maintain normal function of economy under such massive aggression, but we managed to do it both for export and for importation as well, because we as many other European states, we received all fuels from Russia and Belarus, so all diesel and gasoline as well. And now we import through western border, and we really believe that this is a success and very fast adjustment of the market. So now with very big shift of trade flows, and we see that our consumers now see that there are some problems with supplies, but they are bearable. So that especially when we are talking about fuel. So this is about resilience, and then the second topic is a challenge. So that the challenge is also quite clear. So that last year, 2021, we the volume of our export was 167 million tons, of which 117 million tons was exported by sea and majority of these, so that we have up to 10 seaports, but we have major 4, so that's the so-called big Odessa, so that's Chernomorsk, Pivdennny, and Odessa itself, and Mykolaiv, which are the core seaports, as well as Mariupol, which was important for our steel export, because Mariupol used to be the heart of our steel industry in terms of production and export as well. So that's why the blockade of seaports, blockades of sea routes led to the absolutely abnormal situation with blockade of possibility to send goods abroad. And it is still our major vulnerability in terms of trade, and that's why for last 5 months we spent I think that hours, days, and also enormous time together with our colleagues from the European Union and from member states in ensuring how we can use our western border with maximum capacity in order to ensure that we continue our export, because after all, Ukrainian transformation and development of agriculture led to the fact that up to half of global trade, international trade in sunflower oil was trade in Ukrainian or sunflower oil, and 1/4 of international trade in corn is a trade with Ukrainian corn, and 1/10 of trade in wheat is a trade with Ukrainian wheat. So that's why the absence of Ukrainian grains led to the deficits, of actual deficits, and also the jump in prices. So that now we see that when new harvest arrived, the prices are adjusting and getting a little bit lower in comparison with March, but the jump in March is still not overcome, so that the prices are still very, very high. And so that's why we have a very big fall in our export. So that's in comparison, so that the second quarter of 2022, so that's the second quarter of 2022, the export was less than 1/2 in comparison with second quarter of 2021. So it's only 45.8%. And in comparison with first quarter of 2022, the decrease was 37%. So that's, but at the same time, we see that the so that this decrease was very sharp. So it was like immediate shock in March and then April. But then starting from May, we stabilized our export and even slowly, but in very, very stable manner, increase the volume of trade. How we manage this? We manage it due to the help of both governments and companies of our partners. As I said, that internally, domestically, we have very strong initiative and adjustment of our domestic traders, but as well we have...
Mr. Kachka, excuse me to interrupt you. If you could wrap up.
Just 1 second, yeah, so that, but then yeah, so I think that it will be presented, it will be like a bridge to the other presentation of our colleagues, especially Alexander and Georg, that we definitely managed to increase and stabilize this export by means of every day 24/7 coordination between all involved stakeholders. And this is really one of biggest example how international cooperation between governments can bring together all stakeholders, can ensure proper coordination, and this openness actually gave fruits, and we see that our export is increasing, and we at least have a good understanding of the challenges we face all together with our neighbors, and we really appreciate this support. So that's why for us what is important, just to conclude with 1 or 2 sentences, so that it is absolutely important to have a really good relations with your core or anchor trade partners. So for the moment, the EU is the trade partner number one. So 78% of our export going to the EU and then later re-exported to other states, but initially to the EU. It is important as well. What is important globally, not only in the regional context, but also globally, is that we continue to defend our narrative on the development of international trade rules, because for us it is important. We discussed it during the MC12 in Geneva, and we see that Russia tries to weaponize everything, including trade. And that's why we need to increase our trade diplomacy in order to defend our own values and our own interest, and to highlight that stable application of international trade rules and respect to open trade is foundation for overcoming any challenges we face. So that's why we really appreciate the solidarity expressed by our partners during MC12 and the event organized under auspice of European Commission and also the United Kingdom as well, that showed the solidarity to Ukraine, to all the world. But together as well, we need to go to outreach to other partners as well, especially in Africa, with proper explanation of the values we are defending together in trade universe. So thank you. So I think that the topic is really wide and comprehensive. So that's why I will be glad to comment or to reply to questions that you or colleagues might have. Thank you.
Taras Kachka, Deputy Minister of the Economy of Ukraine, thank you very much. And my apologies, I have to cut speakers because we have this tight schedule. So moving without further ado to our next keynote speaker, Gerrit Ziegler, the Deputy Head of the Support Group for Ukraine at the Directorate General for Neighborhood and Enlargement Negotiations, or DG NEAR of the European Commission. Mr. Ziegler will tackle questions like how has the European Commission been supporting Ukraine to address emergency needs for businesses and trade? How is the EU planning to support Ukraine's recovery and reconstruction? Mr. Ziegler, we're all ears.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much for inviting me to this important online event. And the topic you just mentioned is, of course, a topic one could speak about hours to exhaust it, but I will try to stick to the 10 minutes I've been granted. So the EU has responded rapidly and massively with helping Ukraine after the brutal, unprovoked and unjustified attack on Ukraine by Russia starting on 24th of February. Mr. Kachka spoke about it at length. Ukraine is a close neighbor and a privileged strategic partner of the EU. The war has deepened actually the bonds between the EU and Ukraine and has led to an acceleration of the European integration process of the country. On day 5 of the war, as you are aware, on 28th of February, Ukraine submitted even an application for membership in the European Union, which found a positive echo on the EU side, granting the country the European perspective, which means the perspective to become a member state and the status of a candidate country. Before I describe our support to trade and businesses in some detail, let me briefly just summarize the support in other areas the EU has delivered since the beginning of the war. So since 24th February, the Commission has allocated some 350 million for humanitarian aid programs to help civilians affected by the war in Ukraine, and about 10.3 million people have received humanitarian assistance in Ukraine so far. The European Commission is also coordinating the largest ever operation under its EU civil protection mechanism. These are in principle state-to-state donations, in-kind donations. All 27 member states, and that have never happened before in any crisis, plus Norway, Turkey, and North Macedonia, have offered in-kind assistance ranging from medical supplies, shelter items, to vehicles and energy equipment. As of 4th of July, 45,000 tons have been delivered via the logistical hubs. And then what we did just from day 1 of this war, we have repurposed our existing projects. So we took the money that was already available to help directly to strengthen the resilience of Ukraine and to help the population cope with the consequences of the war. And some 140 million have been repurposed for this effort. Another 60 to 80 million is now in the pipeline, mainly for the rebuilding, and that's not yet the full reconstruction, but the rebuilding of critical infrastructure, for example, bridges or certain road sections. Today, as we speak, we are signing a contract with NEFCO, which is the Nordic Environment Finance Corporation, for emergency repairs of central heating and water systems, as well as wastewater treatment facilities. EU delegation in Kiev has also been giving grants to civil society organizations to bring help to the people. Around 30 million euro worth of funding has been given to many grassroots actors and local communities to address the needs of the citizens, with a focus on the recently liberated territories. And we set up a 330 million emergency program, which is now under implementation, where we will mainly want to help the internally displaced persons. There's more than 7 million of those due to the war. And we have housing projects and we have accompanying projects with social economic aspects to integrate the displaced persons and to support the host communities. So we work a lot with the municipalities. There's a huge decentralization process ongoing in Ukraine, which was one of the most successful reforms, and we make now use of it, and one can really see that the municipalities carry a lot of the burdens of the war to help their citizens and help the displaced persons. We also invest in cybersecurity and also in fight against disinformation. Now let me turn more specifically to the aid for trade and businesses. Of course, you are aware we have an association agreement with a deep and comprehensive free trade agreement. This is the main tool to bring the Ukraine and EU closer together so far. Now we are working also enlargement, but the association agreement is still the legal basis of our relationship. And the EU is Ukraine's largest trading partner, accounting for around 40% of the trade. And this trade actually, since the entering into force of the DCFTA, this free trade agreement, doubled since 2016. And now in the war, and Mr. Kachka already, what I'm saying is complementing a bit to what he said, trade did not stop. However, of course, it's substantially hindered as the port, the Azov and Black Sea ports are blocked by the Russian aggression actions. And so far, of course, 90% of the exports went through these ports. And you can imagine what it means now. And against this background, of course, the EU had last Friday, welcomed the agreement signed in Istanbul by Ukraine, Russia, Turkey, and United Nations to unblock the Black Sea for Ukrainian export of grains. To implement this agreement would be indeed a critical step forward to overcome the global food insecurity caused by Russia's aggression against Ukraine. And we said last Friday that what is needed for the successful implementation is, first of all, good faith. Now, Russia's attacks on port installations in Odessa, one day after this agreement had been signed, of course, shows nothing but bad faith on the side of Russia and does not give cause to too much optimism as to the proper implementation of what has been agreed in Istanbul. We will see how it will work. But given the blockage of the ports, and Mr. Kachka pointed at this a lot, we have been working a lot with Ukraine, many director generals in the Commission, to help and create solidarity lanes to facilitate Ukraine's agricultural export and bilateral trade with the EU. And we issued a communication on 12th of May on that. And three objectives did we have in this action plan. The first was to support Ukraine's economy, including by facilitating import of goods to Ukraine. The second was facilitating export of Ukraine's agricultural goods in the first place and addressing mounting global food insecurity by bringing more products onto the global markets from Ukraine. And the third one was showing solidarity with Ukraine and preparing the ground for improved connectivity with Ukraine in the longer term. So as we are all aware, due to the blockage of the ports, the Ukrainian grain can no longer reach the destinations worldwide. Vulnerable populations depend on Ukrainian exports. In North Africa and Middle East, more than 50% of their cereal needs are from Ukraine and Russia. Before the war, Ukraine exported up to 5 million tons of grain per month, and 90% of which through the Black Sea ports. This now has to be redirected unless this Istanbul agreement works, but right now, and that we have been doing the last month and we'll still continue, redirected towards rail, towards road, and towards inland waterways to EU ports, and from there to the global destination. The short-term actions focus on what is necessary now to enable Ukrainian exports in terms of necessary equipment, capacity, the border procedures, additional storage. Medium and long-term actions deal with increasing connectivity and the capacity even further, also with a view to the reconstruction of Ukraine. No, of course, we will not be able to fully substitute the Ukrainian Black Sea ports, but we already see results on the ground. Just to give you some figures, in April, and Mr. Kachka confirmed this, in April, Ukraine exported only 1.2 million tons of agricultural produce. In May, we reached 1.7 million tons, and in June, 2.5 million. So that is 50% of what has been shipped before through the ports. Nevertheless, more needs to be done to bring us closer to our own goal, which we set ourselves, of a minimum of 3 million tons of export per month. The solidarity lanes, as we call them, are also a key contribution to the EU's direct response to the consequences of Russia's invasion of Ukraine on global food security, and actually de facto to Russia's disinformation campaign on this subject. A particular important step was also, and we should of course mention it, that the EU suspended all import duties on all Ukrainian exports to the EU for 1 year. And also the EU anti-dumping safeguard measures have been waived. This is an unprecedented gesture of EU support to Ukraine. We also waived phytosanitary controls at the border to speed up processing at the border. Another example of practical aid is that the European Commission signed an agreement with Ukraine on road transport and liberalizing the conditions for Ukrainian truck drivers. Of course, very important in this context. Now, let me turn to what are we doing for SMEs and for state-owned enterprises in Ukraine. We are supporting micro, small, and medium businesses most affected by the war and aiming to strengthen their resilience, ensuring their business continues.
Mr. Ziegler, excuse me to interrupt you. If you could wrap up within a minute, more or less.
Okay, I'll try to wrap up. I mean, I think I have 2 or 3 minutes left, but okay. We have a EU for Business program, which we are using to give to help with relocation, for example, from the areas affected directly by the war to more safer areas. That's quite important. We also helped and launched a microgrants platform on the DIA portal of the government, an electronic digital portal, which is quite helpful. We are also working with IFIs, I should mention that, EBRD and EIB, to give support to important state-owned enterprises, like the railway company, Ukrzheleznica, which is one of the heroes of this war, continuing the transport, not just of our politicians to Ukraine, which was very, very useful, and we see it basically every day, but of course of the persons, of the IDPs and of the goods in Ukraine. We are also giving support to pharmaceutical company, to other businesses, particularly in the energy sector. So Naftogaz, Ukrenergo, they have received liquidity loans from EBRD, covered by our guarantees. And then I think it's very important we synchronized during the war, and this shows how we integrated more during the war and accelerated it with the war. We integrated our network. So the electricity network of Ukraine is now connected, and Moldova, by the way, is now connected with the grid of the EU. And that's quite important. We are also working on the reverse flow of gas to be less dependent on the Russian gas. So in case there's a crisis from the EU side, Ukraine and Moldova could get gas. So here investments have taken place in the Slovak-Ukraine border, in the Poland-Ukraine border, a lot of things. Then maybe just one word on the direct relief for the budget. We have been paying altogether 620 million, 500 million will come actually next week to Ukraine, to the budget in grants. And we have given a lot of macro financial assistance. 1.2 billion have been paid. Another 1 billion is in the pipeline to be paid in a few days, next week probably. And as you know, we have also announced another payment of more or less 7 other billion, where this should be paid out by the end of the year. So on this one, we are still working on concrete solutions. Maybe final word, yesterday, because it was yesterday, you may have seen EIB has announced a package of 1.59 billion, which goes to Ukraine to help to repair the most essential damaged infrastructure and resume critically important projects. and EIB already earlier had paid 668 million also in support directly to the Treasury. So the long-term reconstruction, I will leave it here. That's a big subject, and as such, the long-term is of course more long-term. We are now working on a new financial instrument tailor-made for Ukraine. That will take still a few months, and then we will also start working full speed with our Ukrainian partners and friends to support them. And it's very important, I think, and I hope I have showed you here that the EU is supporting Ukraine in an unprecedented way, given the unprecedented full-scale war of aggression by Russia against Ukraine. So we stand with Ukraine. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Georg Ziegler from the EC Support Group for Ukraine. Thank you really very much, and my apologies again to have cut you after the speaking time. I know the subject is broad and there's much more to be said, of course. But moving to our next speaker, who is Pamela Coke-Hamilton, the Executive Director of the International Trade Center, addressing questions like how does the ITC foresee responding to the current challenges in the near and in the medium term. I believe you have developed some rather detailed plans for how you wish to assist the smallest enterprises, but that you also have ideas on how to mobilize internally displaced persons in trade-related projects. So please do share your ideas, and very importantly, please tell us also what it would take for these ideas to be realized. Pamela Coke-Hamilton, the floor is yours.
Thanks a lot, Olaf. Thanks for being here. Thanks for having me here. Let me say at the outset that I'm really honored and humbled to be part of this event on this day on such an important issue. I can't think of a better way just before the global review kicks off to remind us all of exactly how and why trade needs to matter for the real world, especially now in these times. I usually start my speeches and interventions with some sort of personal angle, you know, how my professional or personal experiences are brought to bear or linked to the issue at hand. In this situation, I won't and I cannot do it. It is literally impossible for me to imagine the impact, the social, the economic, the psychological impact of such a rapid and brutal loss of lives and livelihoods, of an invasion that has turned a country less than a day's drive from my own office into one of the greatest humanitarian crises of the 21st century. Others have spoken and focused on the wider global impact of the invasion and the rapid rise in food and energy costs, the staggering refugee flows, the hit to growth and rise in debt as the world still struggles with COVID. But I want to step back a minute from the global headlines and instead focus on the Ukraine and its people, in particular on those who are the lifeblood of the economy, its small businesses. And here the picture is for me really distressing. Even back in March, the European Business Association found that a quarter of small businesses in the Ukraine had already exhausted their financial resources. In April, only 13% of Ukrainian SMEs still operated at full capacity. So I can only imagine in late July where those figures stand now. And I wish to recognize Minister Kashta's incredible work in maintaining the flow of the economy, in continuing to invest, in having the transportation, the electricity, and all the other mechanisms continuing to work and function as best as possible in a very, very fragile and disruptive situation. So this is in a country where SMEs before the invasion comprised 98% of firms. Many Ukrainian SMEs have seen their home market collapse as the national economy has shrunk in half, and market opportunities overseas are blocked with no clear timeline for when access will resume. Supply chains and financing have been cut off or demand has disappeared. And I really welcome the comments by the Commission through Mr. Ziegler about how the EU has been helping countries, Ukraine, meet market demand, increase their ability to continue to export, and address the issues that have been created because of this war. So I cannot imagine what business planning looks like when your own city or your home is being shelled and your employees are fleeing for their own safety. We talk a lot in this town about resilience, the ability of small business owners, particularly the very smallest firms, and those run by women and young entrepreneurs, to survive in these circumstances. It is beyond admirable. It's also humbling. I strongly feel that this is one of those moments when international organizations really need to step up And ITC is ready to step up, to dig deep, and to deliver for the people of Ukraine. For those who might know the acronym but not know the agency, ITC is a joint agency of the UN and the WTO. We've been helping small businesses go global through trade for nearly 60 years. We're certainly no stranger to the Ukraine and its neighborhood. Since 2016, with the generous support of Sweden and the EU, and in close partnership with Ukrainian counterparts in the public and private sectors, we've been deeply engaged in helping Ukrainian SMEs through Aid for Trade. We developed a national export strategy for the Ukraine in 2019, bringing SMEs right to the heart of national competitiveness. These interventions have helped Ukrainian firms improve their export performance, land business deals, strengthen their business support organizations, and reinforce the wider ecosystem which small businesses need if they're going to reach overseas markets. As soon as the invasion occurred, our first concern, as with other crisis situations that have sadly become more frequent in these last few years, was of course for the safety and well-being of our staff in the Ukraine. The next step was to think about what our Ukrainian clients and counterparts needed now that their circumstances had dramatically worsened, and how ITC could pivot to support them, how we could help small businesses in the Ukraine remain operational, generate revenue, and find new opportunities. But this is why ITC was ready to act when we were approached by Ambassador Filipenko and her team in Geneva to brainstorm on ways we could help the Ukraine. To respond when you, Deputy Minister Kashka, met us in Geneva last month, to hear your needs, your stories, and your optimism that the private sector in Ukraine could somehow emerge from this awful situation intact and strengthened. While we're still finalizing the details, let me sketch out what I think ITC can do, divided into two broad pillars that we've discussed with our Ukrainian partners. The first area is to support our core constituency of MSMEs. We want to help them and the broader Ukrainian business ecosystem to trade and export to new markets. We want to guide them through the processes and paperwork of new market access, such as the tariff suspensions granted by the EU and the UK. In immediate term, we'll use our existing tools, training and B2B matchmaking platforms to help Ukrainian SMEs find new markets with a particular focus on the EU and UK as destinations, selected sectors like agribusiness and textiles, as well as women entrepreneurs and as beneficiaries. In the longer term, we'll help small businesses build back their competitiveness, especially on a more green and sustainable footing, access financing, move through more resilient trade corridors, and get the right national policies in place. For me, success looks like a message we received from one of our beneficiaries, a farmer who owns a company called Danube Agrarian. It's a company based in Odessa that grows organic fruits, vegetables, and cereals with the delightful tagline of open quotes, products that taste like childhood, close quotes. And there's nothing that's more appealing than products that taste like childhood, I can tell you from experience. It's a company that measures its success by social impact, by ecological awareness, and by the opportunities to provide to young people that which might otherwise look at working, those who would look at working overseas. Just last week, they mailed us to say that with ITC support, Danube Organics has been able to be certified GRASP and Global GAP compliant, which will help unlock new markets. We've supported them to showcase their unique organic offering in several major trade fairs. All this in the middle of this very difficult situation. So I'm hoping for more success stories amongst the many Ukrainian SMEs asking for our support in this time. The second pillar of support is aimed at the millions and millions of refugees and internally displaced people who—
Excuse me
Sorry,
again.
you have to go?
If you could wrap up.
Sure, we're going to wrap up just now.
Yeah.
Who basically have been forced to deal with a situation that has deeply affected their livelihoods. How do we address that? What we're hoping to do is have a means of focusing on helping the IDB community engage in digital entrepreneurship to regain lost markets. We also want to help them with startups and through incubation or acceleration programs. the needs of the Ukrainian small business community and the Ukraine government evolve, we will pivot and adjust as needs be. So let me just close by reiterating what I said earlier. This is really a moment for the multilateral community to step up. And I want to salute the UN Secretary General's news of the grain export deal just last week. I want to really congratulate the EU partners, particularly those in DG NEAR, DG INPA, and our EU delegation colleagues in Geneva. And we're willing and ready to step up with the partnership of these institutions so that we can rebuild resilience and of the Ukrainian people. And we salute their bravery once again. Thank you.
Pamela Cook-Hamilton from the International Trade Center, thank you so much. And already a big thank you to all three previous speakers for accepting so kindly to be interrupted and to conclude within a reasonable time. Now, we will zoom out again and get a wider picture. What is the World Bank doing in response to the war in Ukraine? What about the conflict's impacts on world trade? What lessons from earlier World Bank actions in addressing population displacement? Let me introduce Mona Haddad, Global Director of Trade, Investment and Competitiveness at the World Bank. Ms. Haddad, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. I would like to start by thanking the EU for associating the World Bank to this important dialogue. We stand with the people of Ukraine and the region. The war is a tragedy that is having a far-reaching human and economic impacts. On the issue of the World Bank Group support to Ukraine, since the invasion, the World Bank Group has acted quickly to provide aid to the country so that public services can continue. Our current focus is on immediate financing and planning for reconstruction. Ukraine needs support for the continuation of government services, including core public services such as health, education, and social protection. Maintaining these services and the ability of the government to deliver them is critical in preventing even further deterioration in living conditions and poverty in Ukraine. And safeguarding government capabilities and functions will be the bedrock of any recovery and reconstruction. This is why donors and international financial institutions are focused on quick dispersing concessional financing to Ukraine's budget to make up for the significant drop in government's revenues induced by the war. There's also a focus on redirecting resources to support internally displaced persons. The World Bank has been at the forefront in supporting Ukraine amid the ongoing war and the upcoming reconstruction efforts, leveraging its broad range of financial instruments. It has expanded existing projects, established multi-donor trust funds, and channeled guarantees and parallel financing from donor countries to facilitate the rapid disbursement of funds to meet Ukraine's urgent needs. World Bank support is helping to provide wages for hospital workers, pensions for the elderly, salaries for public servants, and social programs for the vulnerable. We estimate that Ukraine's current financing needs for essential services are about $5 billion per month. To date, we have mobilized $6.5 billion in emergency financing. And most of this financing has already been dispersed, and more financing is expected very soon. We expect to work closely with development partners to support Ukraine's eventual post-war reconstruction. By the end of March 22, the World Bank issued a rapid grade assessment of physical damage to infrastructure and buildings in Ukraine, and will soon work on a full-scale rapid damage and needs assessment. The resources needed will be enormous, and all development partners will need to pull together. Let me mention that Ukraine's economic resilience after 5 months of war was in large part attributable to the difficult and successful reforms in macroeconomic management and institution building that the successive authorities have taken in recent years. This attention to reform and deepening the capacity and transparency of governance will be equally essential as Ukraine prepares for the transition to post-war recovery. On the second question on the impact of the war on the world economy and global trade. We have issued a report from the World Bank on the impact of the war in Ukraine on trade. Globally, the war in Ukraine has deepened the economic slowdown and compounded the damage of the COVID-19 pandemic, elevating the risk of stagflation. Global growth is projected to slow from 5.7% in 2021 to 2.9% in 2022, marking the sharpest deceleration in more than 80 years. The war is exacerbating financial stresses in emerging markets, which have been magnified by high debt and low commodity supplies. It is leading to capital outflows and currency depreciations. It is causing inflation to rise further, prompting central banks to tighten monetary policy more rapidly than expected. And it is increasing food insecurity on a scale that the world has not known in a long time. Globally, the economic impact is being felt chiefly through higher food and energy prices. Ukraine, as we all know, is a key producer of wheat and other commodities. Its sunflower oil production, for example, accounts for 45% of global exports. It's also the fourth largest exporter of corn, accounting for 13% of global exports. Russia is the world's largest exporter of wheat, natural gas, fertilizers, crude oil, and refined aluminum. Price increases are fueling inflationary pressures and food insecurity, and this will have direct consequences on many developing countries, especially low-income countries, through trade. Rising food insecurity is a major risk in many developing countries and could have devastating effects on the poorest. Rising food prices tend to deepen poverty and increase malnutrition, with long-term harm to human development. Ukraine's production feeds 400 million people around the world. That's almost equivalent to the population of the European Union. Sudden spikes in food prices can also lead to social unrest. Some developing countries, as was mentioned by the EC and others, rely heavily on Russia and Ukraine for food. And these two countries supply more than 75% of the wheat imported by several economies in Europe and Central Asia, in the Middle East, and in Africa. We are also seeing a major step back in the attainment of the SDG. It is thus important to maintain trade support, including aid for trade, to support the world's poorest countries whose vulnerability to all these simultaneous crises, the food insecurity, the pandemic, the climate, the war, has increased markedly in the recent past. On the last point regarding the war's impact on Poland, the spillover effects of the war on the Polish economy are expected to be significant in the near term, with key transmission channels, including forced displacement, commodity prices. Sorry.
Excellent. You had the clock yourself.
I do have it, yes. Commodity, I didn't know it will ring. Commodity. So the spillover effect and the key transmission channels are going to be significant in Poland. Since the war in Ukraine, Poland has received more than 4 million Ukrainian nationals and residents. Over 1.2 million people have applied for temporary protection status, of which 94% are women and children, and around 200,000 children have been enrolled into Polish schools. This is truly remarkable. The Polish government has adopted urgent and generous measures to support Ukrainian citizens fleeing the war, including one-time cash support, access to the Family 500 Plus program, the possibility of working in Poland, and access to healthcare and education. Coming from Lebanon and really also having received in Lebanon many refugees from Syria, I do know how much of a burden as well this can place on a receiving country, and we will hear from our Polish counterpart soon. So it's very remarkable what Poland has done. The provision of public services is adding to fiscal pressures, which with fiscal cost estimated between 0.4 to 1.6% of GDP, depending on the number of migrants and the duration of stay. More than 255,000 foreign displaced people from Ukraine have joined the Polish labor market since the onset of the war. At the same time, more than 900,000 Ukrainians, mostly men, have left Poland to fight in Ukraine, causing acute shortages in some sectors such as construction and transport. Multiple challenges will, however, need to be overcome, including children education, access to jobs, access to housing for Ukrainian refugees. The World Bank is in dialogue with the Polish national and regional authorities and is providing them with ongoing monitoring and updated profiles of the refugee population in Poland. We are also assessing the needs and challenges for access and quality in the Polish housing, entrepreneurship, and labor market sectors. Thank you. Over to you.
Thank you very much, Mona Haddad, Global Director of Trade, Investment, Competitiveness at the World Bank. Really, thank you very much. Now, a short reminder for everybody in the audience, we still gather questions for the question and answer session at the end of the debate, which you can write at the bottom of the screen in the Q&A section. Please do so. We also rely on your input for questions to make this really an interesting debate. Now, but let's move from a global to a more European perspective on how to support trade at times of war. What is the European Bank for Reconstruction and Development doing to facilitate trade finance and to make supply chains more resilient? Let me introduce Marco Nindel, Associate Director at the EBRD. Mr. Nindel, we're all ears.
Thank you very much, Olaf, for the introduction. And thank you, of course, to the European Commission for organizing this event today on this absolutely crucial and very important topic. And I'm personally very honored to be able to speak to you and explain to you a little bit more about our trade facilitation program and how we are supporting the export and import business in and out of Ukraine from a practical perspective. The first slide, please. So for those of you who are or might not be so familiar with the trade facilitation program, what we do here at the EBRD, the program itself was established in 1999, and over the course of the years, we have transacted over 29,000 trade deals for a total volume of around 27 billion euros in around 30 countries where the EBRD is active. We have 120 issuing banks where we are able to take direct risk, and we have a global network of around 800 confirming banks around the world where we are able to issue our guarantees to. Next slide, please. How it works usually is that we at the Trade Facilitation Program are facilitating the trade by supporting the trade chain through all stages of the export or import chain. And this, of course, also includes the export production, the transport, storage and distribution, and also the receivables management, which of course is also important in order to provide liquidity for the respective trade transactions. Next slide. So how does it work in practice? We have basically three programs in place, and the main program is, of course, our guarantee program, where we as EBRD are taking on direct risk of, as before mentioned, the 120 issuing banks, where we're taking the political and commercial payment risk and provide these guarantees then to our global network of 800 confirming banks around the world, so that really the export and import business is secured and uninterrupted in terms of the risk cover. Then we are providing a short-term financing facility, which includes that we provide financing to our local partner banks for on-lending to local exporters and importers. And in addition to that, receivables financing, factoring solution where we are also able to provide financing and also guarantees for national and international factoring sites in order to provide here also a liquidity part for that kind of industry. Next slide. Coming to our business in Ukraine, next slide, please. Historically, Ukraine was always one of the most important countries for us, not only in the TFP, but certainly also the EBRD in general. And over the last 20 years or so, we have conducted over 3,000 transactions for almost 4 billion euros with our 10 issuing banks, which we have currently in Ukraine. Next slide, please. And these 10 issuing banks include 3 of the large state-owned banks, which is Okrgas, Orshat, and Ukreximbank. And then we have currently 7 privately owned, either subsidiary banks or national banks, including, for example, Bank Lviv, Crédit Agricole, OTP, Piraeus, Pravex, well-known Raiffeisen Bank, or Ukrosib Bank, for who we are able to provide direct support and liquidity to their trade finance operations. When we go to the next slide, I think the main message for the audience from us, or generally to the wider community, is that since the start of the war in February, around 5 months ago, we have not closed our trade finance operations in Ukraine. Actually, in reverse, we increased our operations in the country, and this is part of the wider 2 billion euro resilient package, which was approved for Ukraine and the neighboring countries by the EBRD, because one of the main points obviously is, in order to provide here real stability for the international trade flow, to keep our trade finance operations open for our partner banks. And let me share with you some personal experience after real adaptation from one day to another, going from almost business as usual to a wartime trade finance operation. It was quite challenging, but given the fact that we ourselves in the team, and me personally as well, of course, with my colleagues, we adapted to a certain modus operandi, and we found a way to continue our assessment and risk assessment towards the new situation which we faced in Ukraine. And with our partner banks, we have conducted over 140 million in trade so far since February, and we see a continuous trend to increase the operations with our partner banks. So while everyone had to adapt from a practical perspective, it seems to be a more regular flow of transactions. And we, of course, also adapted to this kind of situation together with our partner banks and the trade finance community on the ground, which also significantly, of course, had to adapt to the new challenges and the way how they operate. And my kudos, of course, goes to my colleagues in Ukraine from these banks and the wider trade finance community, but especially also, of course, to the companies, the exporters and importers, who shown an incredible amount of resilience, which was mentioned also before by the Deputy Minister. We are very deeply impressed by the resilience and the endurance companies and also our colleagues have in these banks during these very difficult times. And the little we can do from our side, of course, to support the trade finance business is, of course, some real pleasure to work with them also on a personal side. For a couple of examples, as the next slides will show, of course, we also had to adapt to, as I mentioned before, to these new challenges. And we found a way, of course, also to work with our partner banks to find the most crucial parts of trade import and export, which we are supporting. And one of them, of course, is food security. And a case study which we have done only a couple of weeks ago is where a Ukrainian distributor of agricultural machinery bought accessories for a grain storage from Italy. Of course, the Italian exporter was not able.
Mr.
Sorry?
If I may, you are reaching the end of your speaking time. If you could wrap up.
Absolutely, yes, 1 minute. And here we issued a standby letter of credit to the exporting bank in order to smoothly have this kind of transaction done. Maybe just one more example, which we have also done. Next slide, please. And this is for the import of fertilizers, which of course is also incredibly important for the crop season, which is ongoing. And already in the springtime, in March it was, we facilitated a import of fertilizers from a Czech wholesaler, where we issued then our guarantee to the Czech exporting bank, and we then were able to provide a real smooth transaction for the payment as well. One more slide, please, the next one. And that's already my last one. And here we had, of course, also the agricultural machinery. Again, very important to also provide machinery and equipment coming into the country, as without this kind of machinery, of course, you know, the actual exports of the grain would not be happening. And in this instance, we issued a letter of credit support for the Austrian confirming bank so that the goods could be shipped to Ukraine. And again, you know, supporting here particularly an importer in Ukraine through one of our partner banks. That's actually it already from my side, and I very much look forward to the discussion later on if there are any specific questions of what we at EBRD do in our export-import support for the Ukrainian banks. Thank you very much. Olaf?
Thank you so much, Marco Nindel from the European Bank for Reconstruction and Development. Now let's zoom in on more concrete work again and hear from one of the European member states. How does Polish support for Ukraine help in keeping Ukraine's export flows alive? I'm happy to announce that we have with us Alexander Siemasko, Deputy Director at the Department for International Trade and Cooperation of the Polish Ministry of Economic Development and Technology. Mr. Siemasko, Ms. Haddad from the World Bank already mentioned how Poland is impacted. Now we hear more of it. It's up to you.
Thank you, Mr. Burns. I'll try not to repeat what Madam Director Haddad said about Poland's situation. I just want to say that we are thankful for the support we get from World Bank. I had the pleasure of attending a meeting with President Malthus in March 2022, so just at the beginning of the conflict. And we appreciate World Bank's engagement, not only with the government, not only with the local government, but also with the private sector, supporting the entrepreneurial spirit of refugees, of brave women who have arrived from Poland and are trying to make a living here. What I will try to focus on is the challenges and work that has been done together by Poland and Ukraine to materialize the idea of aid for trade. I would also like to thank other participants and DG NEAR and their continuous engagement for creating a stronger Europe and helping Ukraine itself. Now, as we all know, the aid for trade was conceived in order to help the least developed or developing countries engage in global economic exchange, improve the connectivity and sustainable development. It was meant to address macroeconomic and infrastructure challenges. Today, however, it is used in entirely different circumstances, though I believe that there are some lessons learned that can be externalized beyond the unprovoked and unjustified Russian aggression against Ukraine. Now, this aggression is not only a violation of all existing international agreements, rules, and regulations, but it's a cause of immense suffering, but also heroism of Ukrainian people. The consequences of aggression go far beyond Ukraine itself. Supply chains are broken, energy sector disrupted, and food security seriously endangered. Now, obviously, we condemn the aggression in the strongest terms imaginable, but also take a clear lesson from this circumstances that obviously there is a strong onus on Russia to withdraw its troops, to will avoid the supply chains crisis, the food crisis, energy crisis, but also there is some work to be done by us Europeans, us Poles, us the global community, to counter a false narrative, help Ukraine, but also help the world itself. Under those circumstances, keeping Ukrainian exports flow is an immediate task for the world community, one that Poland does not shy away from us, Ukraine's neighbor. To address the urgent need to support Ukrainian exports of grains, Poland has been actively unblocking all existing bottlenecks and using its logistic capabilities to maximize transportation of Ukrainian agricultural communities through European routes and ports. Even though, as Director Ziegler has rightly pointed out, alternative transport corridors for Ukrainian grain will never be able to absorb all the volume of goods shipped through Ukrainian ports before the war, they could support in the short term and build a reliable and diversified logistics system in the long run. So far, the railway transportation through the Polish territories and shipments from Polish ports seem to be the most promising and efficient solution, with annual capacity of rail corridors estimated around 15 million tons and spare handling capacity at Polish ports estimated at 3.8 million tons, based on last year's data. Road transportation is considered supplementary to rail and maritime transport due to its lower efficiency. Now, this Polish capacity, coupled with transport capabilities of our neighbors such as Slovakia or Romania, should meet monthly export needs of Ukraine estimated at 3 million tons. Now, one of the by effects of this blatant Russian aggression was fostering of Polish-Ukrainian cooperation. And this cooperation focuses very strongly on a number of aspects, from refugee aid to military cooperation, but also encompasses trade with very strong Ukrainian ownership. We have signed a memorandum of understanding to strengthen bilateral cooperation in the railway sector, with the aim of significantly boosting rail transportation of goods to the EU and via Europe to the global markets. Polish and Ukrainian railway companies are in the final stage of talks on establishment of the joint company. We have already reached additional bilateral agreements concerning the capacity of Polish seaports, and we have signed an agreement on improving the logistics of agricultural exports by facilitating border controls, allocating additional resources for veterinary inspections and border checkpoints. Now, the challenges we're facing are mainly similar to any barriers for trade. These are the red tapes and bureaucracy, technical infrastructure challenges, communication and information and data flow. Some of these problems have already been addressed, as I mentioned, including border controls and agri-food inspections, though the infrastructural challenges remain. We have invested heavily in creating additional checkpoints at the border crossings, both for rail and for faster clearance of truck transportations. We have created additional gates for cargo clearances, and that should double the capacity of freight clearance. Additionally, some border crossings have been dedicated for freight traffic only, and passenger traffic will be redirected to other crossings. Now, this has resulted in a very large increase of imports of goods from Ukraine to Poland. In April 2022, the imports increased by 8%, and in some categories, such as food products, they have increased by 600 to 700% when it comes to cereals, plant products, or cooking oils. The main challenge that remains, except for obviously the military aggression, is the difference in infrastructure. especially the difference in the railway rolling stock standards. Ukrainian wagons cannot be used in most EU member states. That requires reloading from road gauge transportation to the European standard gauge. This option is time-consuming and costly. Hence, we are currently facilitating. Yes, finishing.
To conclude within a reasonable time. I'm not asking you to conclude immediately, but if you could wrap up.
Sure. We are currently concentrating on facilitating rail transportation by changing bogies of the wagons and ensuring compliance between rail and port infrastructure in Poland and Ukraine. Now, there are a number of other challenges when it comes to storage and transshipment infrastructure. They also are addressed either bilaterally between Poland and Ukraine or through our international cooperation with our partners in the EU, but also the United States and international institutions. We are aware that logistics centers have to increase their capacity to handle large volumes of trade, and we're ready to invest. In conclusion, Poland offers best alternatives to currently impaired maritime transport of Ukrainian goods to the final buyers. We're ready to build a reliable and sustainable transport corridors for food commodities. But at the same time, we call for the international community to keep exerting pressure on Russia to stop using food as a weapon and truly unblock Ukrainian ports in the Black Sea. And by truly, I mean stop any hostile actions at the Odessa port and enable Ukrainian cargo ships to enter the Black Sea unmolested and uninterrupted. We're ready to cooperate with the world community to work out solutions to the current crisis. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you very much, Alexander Zimasko from the Polish Ministry of Economic Development and Technology. And I would like to thank again all speakers for the precious input, which we now have the opportunity to debate. Shortly, we still have another 15 minutes of debate between the speakers, in which we would very much like to take questions from you, the audience. So please do not hesitate to drop them in the Q&A box at the bottom of the screen. Now, to all speakers, short answer, of course, I've very much appreciated. You have seen I interrupted almost all of you, and the same goes for the 15 minutes. We have 6 speakers, 50 minutes. If everybody answers 2 minutes, it answers 2 minutes in one answer, that's already basically filling up this 15 minutes. So even shorter ones allow for more questions. Now, but let's move straight into the debate. And I would like to ask Mr. Kachka, whom I had to cut off for something he had probably planned to say, but what is the most urgent thing in terms of trade facilitation that Ukraine needs now at the moment?
I think that 2 elements that are particularly important and that they are the key for success is first one is logistics, and I think that all presentations of my colleagues, they complement what I started to explain, and it shows that how intensively we coordinate our efforts with Polish government, with European Commissions and other stakeholders. So indeed, this is like a 24/7 work on different aspects. And I think that this is really like a time when we discovered everything about interoperability of our railway system. So that no one of us was so in depth of knowledge about the bottlenecks that really exist. And second big thing is economic activity of people, so that we have a lot of IDPs and a lot of displaced persons living abroad with having status of refugee and others having temporary protection. So we want them to be economically active, and that's why for us it is important to ensure that big employers have a possibility to export their products and employ people. And as well, and even more, what is important is to encourage and develop and support small and medium enterprises. And for them, we have to offer the function of core elements of the system. And also we encourage the support in the form of governmental grants or grants provided by the European Union or ITC and other programs of support for people who want to be economically active and independent and to let's say pursue their interests in a way that based on open economy and open trade. So these are two key priorities. We are working on them together with our partners, and we will be glad for intensification of this work, so that it is as I said, rather foundation of work, because we have other priorities to be based on this, like encouraging entrepreneurship of women, especially that is important because a lot of IDPs are women with children, both those IDPs and abroad as well, and other, or particular attention to agriculture and sustainable agriculture. But on the foundation, our priorities are concentrated around these two elements: ensuring proper logistics and market access, and investment into economic activity of people.
Thank you very much. Now, I would like to throw what you just said immediately to Mr. Ziegler. Mr. Kaczka just laid out a few urgent needs. How do you see, like, focused on these, the ones Mr. Kaczka mentioned? Where do you see room for the European Union / European Commission to step in the immediate short time, let's say?
Yeah. No, thank you. I mean, I fully agree with what Mr. Kaczka said on the economic activities of internally displaced person. I think this is something where we really want to help because that's a huge potential, and of course it also helps the person there. I think one thing we are working on, and that needs to be sustained, is basically this better connectivity, something which are the solidarity lanes. They have now been created during the war in circumstances, but what is important is to make this a long-term project, and I think a project which actually fits very well into the pre-accession process. During this war, Ukraine has become, from a neighborhood policy country, an enlargement country. So all these processes that are now beginning also the reconstruction, they should be aligned and they should be synchronized with the preparation for future membership in the EU. And there, this increased and strengthened connectivity is something which is very important. And connectivity does not only mean infrastructure, but it also means connectivity between businesses. And here we have set up a supply chain resilience platform to help companies in the EU and Ukraine to get connected, to restructure and replace existing supply chains, as well as raw materials, components, goods, services needed to keep production running. So these kind of things to make them long-term sustainable. I think this is what we need to do. We have now a temporary road agreement. I talked about that. I think what is needed then to make this a long-term road transport agreement. And I think that's the direction to go in parallel with the pre-accession process and the preparation for future membership of Ukraine. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you indeed. Perhaps a question to Pamela Coke-Hamilton. Could you expand a little bit more how IDPs can be mobilized in the economy and to help, of course?
Sure. Thanks so much, Olaf. I mean, one of the main things that we wanted to do in the context of internally displaced persons is, first of all, to create a scenario which would allow them, first of all, to identify the emerging and key occupations that we can focus on in consultation with trade associations, employers, private sector, and so on. The other thing we wanted to do was how do we assist local institutions to actually build and in a sense create the synergies to absorb and train IDPs, including in areas of entrepreneurship, skills, export capacity, e-commerce, and also specifically women-led businesses, because as you know, a lot of the women are now bearing the brunt of carrying this situation. One of the areas that we have is the SME Trade Academy, and we want to be able to utilize those modules that are there, as well as the She Trades modules, to make this work. There's also been, based on a lot of work we've done in Dadaab, Kenya, and other refugee centers, where we link persons to online opportunities that are already out there. So we create a framework where they can be linked to online as freelancers or support for digital entrepreneurship and navigating online workplaces such as Fiverr and Upwork and freelancer.com. And the final thing we're looking at was how do we help them actually do startups and also enhance their business and income opportunities? Because this is something that many of them are professionals, many of them are highly qualified. How do we enable them to utilize those skills to build their capacity?
Thank you very much. Perfect. Perhaps a question to Ms. Haddad. How can the support to large infrastructure deal with the continued and indiscriminate and sometimes even targeted destruction by Russia? How can that still survive?
Thank you very much, Olaf. Well, what we are seeing is that it's having a hard time surviving. So what we see is, for example, because of the war and the shelling, Ukraine's wheat, for example, is not able to leave Ukraine. And the ports are closed, the roads are shelled, and the silos are full. And it is actually creating a problem even for next year's harvest, whereby if the wheat is not sold or exported and taken out of the silos, there will be no storage facilities for the new harvest. So it's very important that we deal with this issue quickly. The agreement that was signed with the UN and Turkey a few days ago hopefully will come to fruition and will allow some of these commodities to exit the country and help Ukraine and help the people that depend on Ukraine's exports. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much. That leads me to another question I wanted to ask Mr. Kacha a little bit later, but I already asked it now. Now, if Russia deals in bad faith in the agreement, the trade agreement on grain export, is there any alternative idea to, rather than ship it outside the country, get it on trains, for example? Is there any alternative that is thinkable, Mr. Kachka?
Yeah, so that I think that this is as well a topic that is on the let's say pages of all media, so digital, all newsletters, and full of details, insights, and everything else. So that our understanding and estimation of this problem is that the market forces behind the grain markets and commodities markets in Ukraine are so strong. So in terms of supply from Ukrainian part, the interest of traders, the interest of shipping community too, because for them this route will be extremely profitable because the prices for fracht is really high, and the demand on the markets for grain, that all these market forces will drive for the most efficient use of capacity of free ports. And but these free ports can export maximum 70% of what we expected to export if the export is normal. So therefore the demand for solidarity lanes, we're working on the demand of trade routes with member states we discussed previously, will be as well quite high. But at the same time, we see that Russia will try to manipulate this trade through Ukrainian seaports by shellings or other provocations or attacks, and that will definitely limit the capacity because they will distract. The question is that the intensity of this distraction, they will try to distract people from using these sea routes, but the question is that how severe it will be. So whether they will destroy several commercial vessels or whether it will be some shellings nearby seaports like today in coastline Odessa, so because it on the weekend it was directly to seaport. This will definitely negatively influence. That's why we need to ensure that everyone has a capacity or the choice between different sea routes, that we are not depending only on seaports and on sea routes, but we have full capacity of our Danube river ports, we have full capacity of railway and Baltic seaports as well. So that's why I think that these investments done by all of us for improving logistics through Western border will be even more useful as a guarantee that that Russia has no, let's say, influence only for one monopoly trade route from Ukrainian seaports. So this is the starting point, and we can not predict. We can only rely on exact figures, and let's hope that we will be able to export as much as possible through seaports. Thank you.
Well, yes, a very hopeful answer, and we join you, of course, in this hope. Just one question to Marko Nindl. Mr. Kachka has laid out a few needs in his earlier answer to my first question, and of Ukraine, like in a short time. And I would like to ask you, basically, where do you see room for the European Bank for Reconstruction and Development to step in there?
So from our side, I believe that obviously, as mentioned also in my presentation, the EBRD committed to a wider range package of our investments, which we want to conduct in Ukraine. But in terms of the trade, we will see further increases in the trade volumes, which we are conducting with our partner banks. But I think one of the measurements which we tried to understand fairly quickly, and I also saw a question from one of the audiences, was regarding the tenors of the transactions, because obviously we had to reassess our risk-taking capacity, which we had, and we reduced the tenors for the transactions which we were able to support, because the war on the 24th or the start of it on the 24th of February also caught us operationally, I would almost say, by surprise, right? So we had some kind of measurements in place before and then shortly after, and we also had to reassess. But we learned from our partner banks what we need to do in order to provide the necessary support for the respective importers and exporters. So we listened to them, and we are able to offer extensive or longer tenors now. So this was one of the measures which we implemented over the last couple of weeks. It's not to the full swing as it was before, like up to 3 or 5 years tenor, but if the underlying trade transaction allows, we go up to 1 year now. So these are the measurements, obviously, what we can do in terms of the trade finance.
Thank you very much. A question to Mr. Zimasko. Is there a program of logistic corridors that might be accessible for Ukrainian SMEs, having substantially unsold stocks of commodity foods and consumer goods, but who have a lack of experience in export?
Thank you very much. There is no single dedicated program to Ukrainian SMEs when it comes to logistics. However, there is a dedicated institution that is able to provide help, and I'm referring to the Polish Agency for Investment and Trade, which has a very extensive Kiev office, which for the time being has relocated to Poland, but is dedicated now to support both Polish businesses in Ukraine, but also Ukrainian businesses operating in Poland. They offer services in English, Russian, Ukrainian, Polish, obviously, and they can be reached at paih.gov.pl, where they can provide assistance to Ukrainian companies. They also provide assistance to Ukrainian companies that wish to temporarily transfer operation to Poland. They cooperate on a business co-working center together with Ukrainian Digital Enterprise Agency, DIIA. So this is the proper agency to address, and these colleagues of mine will be very happy to offer on-site, hands-on, and very precise aid in order to ensure that help buyers for the said goods, or enable to connect those Ukrainian companies to Polish shipment and logistic companies in order to make sure that these goods are transferred fast and efficiently. So, so we have identified this problem, and we are aware that this is more acute the smaller company is. Hence a strong focus on smaller enterprises. Again, PAIH, paih.gov.pl, or just Google Polish Agency for Investment and Trade, and that should be one of the first Google answers that you may be able to find, and they will help you navigate the maze.
Mr. Zamasko, thank you very much for that very practical help and support given to people. Maybe a last question to Mr. Ziegler. Looking ahead at Ukraine's recovery and reconstruction, whenever that might be, but what role will trade play, and how is the EU planning to support Ukraine going forward in the longer run?
I mean, of course, support to trade. I think I outlined it. We need now to implement what has been agreed. I think we went already quite to the limit. I mean, going with the tariffs down to zero. This is, of course, very much helping trade with the solidarity lanes. We try to do it with the infrastructure to help. Also, the procedures at the border crossing points. I think here we are. There's still some room for improvement. We are now trying also to invest to upgrade border crossing points. That will help very much with of course processing the procedure at when goods are being transferred through the borders. So I think these are just a few of the issues to be done. I think further work is then to set up the right coordination platform for the reconstruction. This is currently work in progress, and of course further financial assistance. We are at this stage, basically we exhausted the financial means we have for 2023, and we are developing a tailor-made instrument for future reconstruction of Ukraine, and after the summer we will come back with more detailed proposals on this. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, and we have exhausted our time already too, well, more than exhausted even, so it is just left for me to actually express a heartfelt thank to all speakers and participants. Thank you also very much to everybody who has attended this webinar organized by the European Commission. And if you want to know more about the work of DG NEAR, please follow its social media accounts. Now, perhaps as a sort of social conclusion, I'm very much aware that we only scratched the surface of the debate. Of course, we could have debated for much longer time if we had the time, but there is clearly a role for support in general and for aid for trade, in particular to countries like Ukraine that find themselves in a situation of war. Now, I think today's discussion is intended to convey the strong commitment to helping the victims of Russia's unprovoked war on Ukraine and the specific possibilities for actually doing so. So I would say that all of us and all of our countries can play a positive role in this. And in that sense, thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Olaf.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, everyone.
And bye-bye. Thank you, everybody. Ciao, ciao.
Hi, Mia. That was Mia. Tak, to znaczy jako tak, oni, nie wiem czy Olga, czy